Hello and welcome back to the third channel. Du-du-du-du-du. Back for another interview. Oh, I know, shock horror. No, it's like a new time travel invention. I've travelled, woo, as you do, and so we're here today with another special guest. He's back for more. Can you believe it? These people want even more of me. They liked me so much last time. They can't get away. I know. I thought it was like a bug spray. Who knows? But he's back for more. He's best known for being interviewed by me. I'm gonna say 2 years ago, but I forgot to look up the date because it's my own fault. It's the one and only, and I'll say it correctly for the first time on camera. It's one and only Steve
Hello,
Nallon.
hello, hello, hello.
So we'll start at the beginning of our current timeline. How did you get into time travel?
Well, if you were born in 1960, as I was, you were very lucky because you had Doctor Who growing up, and there's another series called The Tomorrow People on television, and then there was one called Time Slip, and Cat Weasel I loved. So there were loads of children's programs that in different ways played with time and time travel specifically. And even if they didn't play with time travel, there was a program called The Magic Boomerang, and this was an Australian series, and a boy had a magic boomerang, and when there were difficulties, he would throw the magic boomerang up into the air. It would sort of, while it was up in the air and coming back to him, time would stop, and he would therefore be able to run round and put things right.
Yeah.
You know, if somebody was about to hit somebody, he'd be able to turn them around so they wouldn't hit somebody and all that sort of stuff. But he only had as long as the boomerang was in the air, and then he'd catch the boomerang, everyone would start moving again. But somehow he'd solved the problem. I loved that because it's a sort of Deus Ex Machina, machine of the gods, but it's a fun one, and I quite enjoyed that. Yeah, and of course there was Star Trek. That had a couple of time travel episodes. So if you were born in 1960, as I was, you watched television, and there were all sorts of time travel stories. So when you're a kid, everything's normal that you see on television in a way, and and therefore sort of time travel just seemed to me the most normal thing in the world because it was there every day in stories.
Yeah. And the magic boomerang's a better example of how to use stop time to use it for good, rather than in Bernard's watch, where he forgot his PE kit, so he had to stop time so he wasn't late to get his PE kit, or he wanted to cheat in a math test. I mean, it,
But the thing is, you create with time travel stories. I think the story comes first. You decide, right, okay, what story am I going to tell? Who are the characters? Who are the villains? And then you think, okay, well, that's the story I want to tell. So what rules do I need to make that story work? And once you have your story, you can create your rules. And since it's your story, you can have any rule you like, really. I mean, for example, uh, the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe is
yeah,
not a time travel story,
yeah,
but it has an interesting rule, and that is when the children go into Narnia through the wardrobe, they can stay there for weeks, months, I don't know, even years. But when they come back, time has not moved on.
yeah.
That is that rule. And I don't know if Stephen King has ever read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. I suspect he has, actually. So when he did his JFK time travel book recently, which I think has now been made into a film or a television series, he has a similar rule that time, no matter how long you go into the past, time when you come back,
Yeah.
I think it's a 2-minute rule. I think it's just moved on about 2 minutes or so. I can't remember. I did read it, but so that will suit his story and how he wants to tell it, and that's the point. So you can stop time, and it be a good thing, or you can stop time and it be a bad thing, and that depends on whether you're a hero or a villain.
And not only have you been a very vocal person on time travel, you've also made a very fascinating uh, and interesting, and also will melt your brain segment on Newsnight. What was it like filming your segment on Newsnight?
Well, that was fun. So here's how things are connected in life. So Spitting Image, which I used to work on and did voices for, such as Margaret Thatcher. And for some of the younger listeners, Margaret Thatcher was the British Prime Minister from 1979 until 1990. You have probably read about me in your history books at school. I was in the iconic Great Britain section. And anyway, so I was at. So they had a reunion recently for BBC Radio 4, and on the person doing the interviews was Kirsty Walk from Newsnight, and we happened to get the train back together. And so she said, "Oh, Steve, what are you up to at the moment? You know what it is that you're doing. You know, tell me all about it. Tell me, what you're doing." Because I had met her before, we'd worked together before. So, and I said, "Well, oddly enough, I've written this novel." "Oh, really? Oh, really? That's interesting." And I said, also, I've hopefully got a book coming out about time travel, because my novel is about time travel, and this book is about time travel. And she said, "We'll do it. We'll do it on Newsnight. We'll do it on Newsnight." And I said, "Right, okay." So I always carry something with me about the novel, or so I gave her that, and I gave her my number, and she said, "I'll give it to the team. I'll give it to the team." So a few weeks went by, and then I got a phone call from her. She said, "Is the because the BFI, British Film Institute, were also doing a time travel season." So she said, "Steve, is the book coming out?" I said, yeah, it's coming out very soon." And she said, what about the BFI? I said, "Oh yeah, there's a BFI time travel season. It's not been announced yet, but it's there." She said, "We'll do it on Newsnight." So then a few minutes later, I get a call from the producer, and I sent him the book. He read it over the weekend. He said, "We're going to do it. We're going to do it. We're going to do it." And he was great. And we made this film, and I thought it would be a quick interview in the studio with Kirsty, and no, it turned into this all singing, all dancing, bell shaking 2-day shoot. And I did ask. I said, "Well, will I get any payment for this?" And they said, no, of course not. You're promoting your book, so we BBC can't, pay you for that. So that was fine. I was fine about that. So here's the thing. He wrote into the script a toaster. So the toaster was going to be the thing that sends me, as it were, back in time. And there's an episode with Homer Simpson in The Simpsons that has a toaster that does that. Though oddly enough, the producer didn't know that. And I said, "Oh, well, Homer Simpson did it." He said, "Really?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Oh, all right. But we're going to stick with the toaster. We're going to stick with the toaster." And I said, "Well, that's fine. I don't have a toaster." He said, "Well, buy a toaster." And when we did the filming at my house downstairs, where I am now, I said, "What about the toaster?" He said, "You can keep that." And that became my fee. I kept the toaster. And that was great. And so we filmed at the BFI, British Film Institute, with Dick Fiddy, my co-writer of the book Destination Time Travel, and the season called Destination Time Travel. And he wrote, the producer wrote this great script, and I suggested we shoot outside Back to the Future musical, which is in London at the moment. And he, being a BBC producer, made a phone call and said, no, we're not going to shoot outside the theatre. We're going to shoot on stage, and you're going to get into the DeLorean with Doc and Marty. And well, they're going to be on stage. They're not. The DeLorean is tiny. It's absolutely. It's for munchkins. And I could hardly get in it. He said, "Yeah, it's very tight, Steve. It's very tight." But it was a great thrill, to get inside the DeLorean and then the flashing lights on it, and that was great fun.
Yeah.
Till 2024. So the news night, the 25th of September, and it's 27 minutes 40 seconds in. So if anybody wants to watch it, it's available on the BBC iPlayer.
And near me, someone used to own the. I think it was the actual car that the DeLorean's based off. I think it was a car that looked similar. And then when every time I go and try and find it, now it's disappeared. So he might have time traveled away. Yeah.
Well, the script actually was very tight.
Yeah.
And we had our own rules because there were two of me.
Yeah.
Because I time traveled into the past and my future self was already at the BFI. So I ran to the BFI and then found my future self.
Yeah.
And then we decided that two versions of me couldn't exist in the same world. And so we were sort of running after each other. And that's a time travel rule. If you do travel in time and you meet yourself, what do you do? And we decided we couldn't be in that situation. We didn't really go into why. There's a Korean television series where if you meet yourself, you sort of merge into one, or at least one of you disappears. And that's a rule that I have in my own novel, oddly enough. But we decided that we couldn't have two of us, but we'd solve the problem by going to the DeLorean. The DeLorean would then send me back in to where I should be, as it were. So, and then I presume, I don't know, I became that person. So we essentially got rid of. Then you had to decide how you distinguish between the two Steves. And I actually ordered a Doctor Who hat so I could wear that. But he never arrived in time. So I wore a yellow hat. I had a yellow hat I'd been to a wedding in. So and that's quite fun because it's very distinctly yellow. So you always knew which Steve was which. So you have to write these things into the script.
Yeah.
And the producer had read the book. He loved the book.
Yeah.
And he realized that all these things had to be very carefully planned and written into the script.
Yeah. And not only have you written the book that you were showing off just then, you've also written another book, which I've handily by my side.
I've got a slightly different cover. You see, that's interesting. There's a whole story behind that, which I won't bore you with, but that you've got a very rare copy, because for various reasons the copy you have could not be sold. There's a mistake in it, and it could not be sold in shops. So that's a very rare copy of that particular book. This is the one that is available to buy in shops, online, or whatever. Yours is not. Yours is not available. So you've read it, I think. Well, hopefully you've read it.
And the question is will you ever do an audiobook version? Will you act it out in audio?
Well, an audiobook has been planned for the past 2 years.
Yeah.
But there is an actor, a young actor I've been working with. He's in his 20s, but he sounds young.
Yeah.
The question will he sound young next year? Because he's in the last 2 or 3 years, he's grown older, and your voice changes.
Yeah.
And so he's aware of that.
Yeah.
So, and the other thing was there's 2 more books meant to happen. One is next year, and the other is hopefully in 2024. So book 2 is written, book 3 is not. And I've come to the conclusion that what I would like to do is record all 3 together.
Yeah.
In one go. Because I don't want to be in a situation where, for whatever reason, we employ one actor to do book 1 or book 2, and then we have to get another actor to do book 3. So I'd rather record them all in one go. Be a big record, but that's the conclusion I've come to. And you want consistency as well in that. But no, it has been planned, and we have rehearsed it, but it just hasn't happened yet. And it does take time to do these things.
Yeah. And do you reckon that the book would work as a TV series as well?
I think I think you enjoyed it. You thought the Northern humor was fun.
Yeah.
The issue with the book for me is that the part 2 has the 2 big twists.
Yeah.
Now, the book you've read, it's a nice little story. You know, there's they go into an alternate world where time it's sort of in the past. It's not quite clear how it's in the past or why it's in the past. And the great reveal in the story, which, you know, no spoilers, but there is a reveal why these men that are living in this house together are living in the house together and have never left. And it's rather sad, but and very poignant. And then something happens where that world comes to an end. And then right at the end of that book, there's a big cliffhanger. So there is, you know, clearly a part 2. But there's no huge twist. But in book 2, there are 2 huge twists. And that, I think, is where people, if they read book 2, that's where the movie is. If anybody was going to make a movie, that's where the movie is. So if it were a movie, I think if it was a television series, it would be in 6 parts, because that's how the book. So you've read book 1; it's clearly in 2 parts. There's hour 1, hour 2. The second book works the same way, so I think it could. But the chances of that happening are pretty zero, because the problem with this book is not the book. People have enjoyed it. It's got good ratings, and I know 12 and 13-year-olds who are reading it again. They've read it once and they're now reading it again for the 2nd or 3rd time. They really love it. The thing is, there's just so many of these out there.
Yeah,
that's the thing. Everybody's after the J.K. Rowling gold dust, and so you're just fighting. The advantage of this one, the time, is there's no other book like it, because it just it's for the streaming generation.
yeah.
So yes, we talk about Back to the Future. Yes, we talk about the Terminator, and we also talk about Christmas Carol. We also talk about some of the classic stories. That go back to the Twilight Zone and all that sort of stuff. But actually, it's really for the streaming generation. So it's television series such as Doctor Who, such as the American series Timeless, Travelers, 2 Korean series, one called Sisyphus, one called Alice. There's a wonderful Spanish series. There's a Turkish series on time travel. These are all available to what they're hugely popular. Because television time travel series they always get an audience, but nobody's written about them seriously in a book before. And there are loads of stuff online about Dark, for example, the German television series Dark. It's a hugely popular cult series and brilliant. But to my knowledge, it's not in a book. And what's different about Destination Time Travel is that most of the books I read, there was quite a few books on time travel, very good ones, but they had a chapter on Back to the Future, they had a chapter on Terminator, they had a chapter on Somewhere in Time, they might have had a chapter on Doctor Who, but they tended more or less to concentrate on the movies, but not so much on television. Whereas I say, the book that Dick Fiddy and I have written, Dick Fiddy is at the BFI, British Film Institute, is really concentrates on television and includes Family Guy. And includes the one that Nicholas Lyndhurst did, the sitcom that Nicholas Lyndhurst did, Goodnight Sweetheart, and another series that Dick knew about that I didn't, Time Wasters, and programs like these are all cult shows. And Red Dwarf, of course. No, Red Dwarf is big on time travel. So anyway, we've brought all these ideas together and the headlines. And the thing about you see, there's no chapter as such on Back to the Future. The chapters are on things like chapter 12, which in this book is in the wrong order.
Yeah.
We've the first chapter is chapter 5, then it goes to chapter 7, then it goes to chapter 8, then it goes to chapter 10, then it goes to chapter 12, and then it goes to chapter 14. That was the editor's idea. We didn't think of that. She thought of that. She said, why didn't you mix all the chapters up? So we did. But you get chapter 11, time windows and time threads.
Yeah.
Chapter 13, time loops and causal loops in time tales. Chapter 3, right at the bottom. The rules of time and time codes. So it's thematic,
Yeah.
And looking at the construction of time travel stories as opposed to here's a chapter on Back to the Future.
Yeah, and
no, there is a chapter on Back to the Future, but it's a slightly different.
And time travel itself is very popular. Now there was a very good program that not many people have heard of. That was on it was on Netflix at one point. It was called Continuum. And that was bizarre and good because it was about a woman that had accidentally found herself in the past and spent the whole program trying to get to the future to be back with the son, and then it's never it wasn't a happy ending for her. Anyway, she I don't know what she's up to now, but she's clearly not with a child because she can't be with a child. No spoilers if no one's seen it, but the ending is it's probably worse than Game of Thrones Series 8. And why do you reckon that time travel shows such as To Continue Worthy Sense? Why do you reckon shows like that sort of try and end where the time travel messes up? Why do you reckon that it's a trait that?
Well, you get into a situation with stories where you either want neat stories, and it all goes back to this man here called Robert McKee, who wrote the book on stories, the classic book on stories. And he argues that the popular stories, the ones that we are drawn to, are those stories where you have essentially a single story, a single protagonist, single hero. They set out to do their goal on their journey. They learn something on their way. They change somehow before they are able to achieve their goal. And once they achieve their goal, the story comes to an end and everything's neatly tied up.
Yeah.
But life isn't like that, he says. And sometimes you get stories which make no sense whatsoever, or end on a downer, or end on a question mark, and or have an open ending, because the whole point about life is that life has an open ending, except at the very end. And then it's closed off. But the point is, we don't live linear narratives in our life. We may one of the theories of story is that or the story theory is that one of the uses of stories to us psychologically is that we absorb their structures without knowing it, and then we're able to look back on our own lives and see structure in our own lives because we've seen so many stories. So we're able to say, I got this job because of that. So the story I told about Kirsty Walk, the sort of inciting incident, or the catalyst event would be the fact that we got the train together, and it was a pure coincidence that we were sat opposite on our way home. The inciting incident was when I said to her, I'm working on a time travel story. And she said, we'll get it on Newsnight. There's the action. We'll get it on Newsnight. And then it happened. There were lots of obstacles in the way, because there always is, because it wasn't actually that easy to do for all sorts of reasons, though everybody was great at Newsnight, lovely team. But, there were issues came up. But then we do it, and it was a big success. Everybody loved it. So then you've got a beginning and a middle and an end. And that is true. You do get sort of narratives, but but the problem with life is there probably is no single beginning to any story, because I'd already worked with Kirsty, and we got on quite well. So you need that. Was that the beginning of the story in a way? You know, so what I'm saying is life is more complicated than than stories are. But what we do is we neatly turn them into stories. The other point about stories is that while we were making the Newsnight film, I was doing loads of other stuff as well.
Yeah.
But you don't see that in the story. You know, you don't see the personal stuff, or the fact that most of my days are just sat here writing, because that's boring. So you only do the interesting part of the story. And it's very difficult, as I say, to work out, you know, when did the big change in your life happen? When you got a job, when you got married, when you got divorced? I don't know. You know, when was the big change?
Yeah.
As you get older, it all merges into one.
And when you're writing any of your books, just in general, do you sit there for hours at end writing and writing, or are you one of those where when you've got a burst of creativity, you run to the nearest desk and write down the ideas that you've got for that part of the story straight away, or do you let them like develop in your head?
All of that. There's no rule in that sense. I work. Look, my pencil is tiny. I'm still using it because I'm from the north, and I'm going to get my money's worth out of that pencil. So I'm still using it. So I work in pencil, and I write very quickly because my brain thinks quickly.
Yeah.
So I don't type because I can't type, but I can type it in once it's done, and then I write out in longhand in pencil. And then I dictate it into this microphone, some software that then turns it into text, and then I rewrite that text. So, and as I'm speaking it into the microphone, if it doesn't sound right, I change it so it gets a little rewrite as I'm speaking it. It then gets a rewrite within the software, because the software doesn't always understand what I'm saying. So it gets things wrong, and I have to correct those. So that gets a rewrite. But in terms of so every morning you turn up. Yeah. That's the point. All writers say the same thing. What's the most difficult thing about writing? Turning up. Just, okay, it's cold, I don't feel well, but I've got to turn up. If you stop, you'll never go back. Yeah. I hear stories of writers who wrote 30,000 words of a novel, and then they stopped for a few days, and then that few days became a few weeks, and they never went back to the novel. So you've got to be disciplined and work every day. The only day I don't work is Christmas Day. We're recording this very early in the morning, and I've got to go to an event at the BFI, a TARDIS event. So I won't really do any writing today, but I'm writing some short stories at the moment, and I'm reading lots of short stories. So on the tube in the way in, I'll take a book of short stories, and that's working. And when I'm working, which I shouldn't do, so I'm working on this book at the moment, and when I get a little idea, not stealing from the book, but when I get a little idea, I put it in the margin. So yesterday I came up with a plot, completely different to the book I'm reading, but it's a homage to the book I'm reading. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. I don't think that's been done before. It's a homage to a particular writer who I'm very fond of, very good writer. But I needed a sort of in his style and in his manner, but unique to me. Yeah. And then a friend of mine staying, and I told him the plot when he came back, and he said, "Oh, that's creepy." Yeah. And I said, "Well, that writer is a creepy writer." So I he said, "Oh, that's good." So now I've got my plot, or I've got my end of my plot, and then I'll work backwards. Now I've got the end, I can go back and work out how it all works. Yeah. And that's just thinking. You're just absorbing a load of ideas. either from books or from life.
Yeah.
And you wake up in the middle. So with this book, actually the sequel to this book, there's which involves having two versions of the same person. And I then realized as I was writing it, I'd forgotten with one character there were two versions of him, and I didn't know what to do with him. And I woke up at 1 a.m. I thought, there's two of them, and I won't bore you with it. I'd moved the others to a different place, but I forgot he was still there.
Yeah.
And I thought, what am I going to do with him? And then I turned him into the hero of the story. He becomes the hero, or helps out the hero.
Yeah.
And because I'd forgotten about him, and then I worked out the readers would forgot about him.
Yeah.
And therefore he can come back into the story completely unexpectedly.
Yeah.
So that's that. But so I woke up at 1 a.m. in a panic. And I then went to sleep about 5 o'clock in the morning, because it took me 4 hours to work out how the plot was going to work.
Yeah.
So during that process, I have these little notepad things, post-it pads by the side of the bed. So my entire notepad, this is empty, but my entire notepad at the side of my bed was completely full of notes.
Yeah.
Because I'd forget it otherwise.
Yeah.
So everything you said, it's a mixture of sitting down and writing. It's a matter of thinking, and it's a matter of, as you said, you suddenly get the inspiration, you write it. So it's all of those things. You need to use all of them, I think.
And when you're researching about time travel, do you have fun watching and listening to different time travel based stories?
Yes, but you then begin to realize, oh, they've taken that idea from that book, or they've taken that principle, and then you look at some old ones from the 50s and you realize that what you thought was original to a particular story in the 80s wasn't really that original at all, and somebody had done it in the 1950s. So you begin to see the patterns, you begin to see the devices, you begin to see, and I'm the same. So one of the great plot devices in Back to the Future is the Polaroid.
Yeah.
The Polaroid is central because it allows Marty to know whether or not the actions he's taking in 1955 will change events in 1985. Yeah. But it's a device, and a very good device. Travelers has a similar device, where items change, items physically change. There's a coin that goes from JFK to Nixon and then back to JFK again, depending on whether they succeed in the mission or not. And I came up with, for my second Swidges book, I had to come up with a similar device.
Yeah.
But not a photograph, but it is an image. I had to find a way that he can see the changes. And that took quite a while to work out, how he would be able to do that. But actually it was oddly enough, the method was in the very first chapter of the book, of this book, the first couple of chapters of the book. So I sort of thought, I've already got it. It already is there in the narrative. I'm just going to use it in a slightly different way. So I didn't want to bring in something completely from outside. I wanted to bring in something that was already present within the story.
Yeah. And when you're like researching these things, do you listen to like audio dramas based on like the TV series to see how like they've used the same sort of like method of time travel years later to see whether or not that element still works and whether or not you can use certain elements. For instance, Time Slip as the audio dramas as well as the TV series. And do you think like looking back on old methods now would help you to develop a new method?
Yes, I think you take the principle and you you take the principle, but you come up with your own version.
Yeah,
So I don't have a Polaroid. If I had a Polaroid, people say that's Back to the Future.
yeah,
What I use, slightly not a spoiler exactly, but you've read the first book. You know that what he sees is a reflection in a pane of glass. He sees something happening in a pane of glass. So what I came up with was that he can see the change in a reflection,
yeah,
and but only in if he's in a particular area
yeah,
where that reflection is possible. So you have to limit it. So he doesn't have the time window to the future all the time, because that would be too easy.
yeah,
You've got to make it more difficult. So, and I thought, well, I like the idea of a reflection that in a pane of glass or in a mirror or something. He's got some sense of the future. My hero William in this book, and I've sort of taken that and developed it so that it becomes a time window in book 2 and hopefully book 3 to a potential future,
yeah,
as well.
yeah,
And maybe other people have used it in the past. I mean, looking glasses, mirrors are used all the time in ghost stories and so on. And there's mirrors are also used in time travel stories. There's an Australian television series where if the same mirror, physically the same mirror, is at the right angle in the right place, 80 years apart, one person can walk through it into the other mirror that's at exactly the same angle. But of course, what that means is that if somebody cleans the room in the year 2000 and moves the mirror, that person then can't get back. So you find a way to make it difficult. You find a way to make your time window as difficult as possible. So when I was looking at the way Back to the Future works, there's two actions. Marty has to get Lorraine and George back together on the dance floor, and his antagonist there is Biff, who's physically bigger than George. And George has got to do it himself. Marty can't do it for him. But Marty encourages him, and George sorts it all out, and that's fine. But there's a lot of toing and froing in that scene. George has the advantage, then Biff, then George, and all the rest of it. And the same with the other action in Back to the Future, which is Doc Brown trying to connect the cables and get the lightning into the car. And his forces of antagonism, not a person, but nature. The wind and keeps blowing, and the tree doesn't behave. So, but what the point is, you make it as difficult as you can for your protagonists to do what they need to do, because that's great story. So when you're watching Back to the Future, you're on, will he do it? Will he do it when, and that's the same for any story. You just write those, you learn to write those things in.
And so for anyone out there that's watching this and like budding writers or young up and coming writers or people that are currently in the middle of writing whatever, that might be a novel, it might be a script or whatever, what advice would you give them about being a writer?
Well, I think if you want to look at structure, this book is by Robert McKee, and I've met Robert McKee and I've chatted to him, and he's seen as a bit old-fashioned now. But it's quite a big book, it's a thick book, but it's very difficult to beat this book in terms of structure. It won't tell you how to write. There are other much better books that will give you advice on style. Stephen King's book on writing is brilliant. All writers love Stephen King's book. He doesn't do structure, but he talks about writing and how he writes. He has a thing where he doesn't believe that you should. He says that all characters should say he said. So not he purported, or he shouted, or he whispered, or he spouted. he hates all that. I disagree. If you read J.K. Rowling, characters are always spouting, purporting, whispering. He just says, no, just say he said or she said. So that's where I slightly disagree with him. He doesn't like adverbs. He hates adverbs. Don't have adverbs. I don't see why not if they're used sparingly. Lots of writers say don't use the passive sense, passive verb sense. I found, I have that in my correction thing, in my word thing, and it's always telling me you've used the passive voice. And I look at it and think, yeah, I like the passive voice in this context. So I think it works in this context. So it doesn't come up every time I say a sentence, but or never use the passive voice. No. There are other books out there, but if you are a big fan of time travel, you're a fan of, this book basically deconstructs how those stories work in terms of their devices, their plots, and so on. And it's not meant to show you the rules and to ruin the stories. It's the opposite. It's to say, look how well constructed this is. But it is constructed. Somebody had to think what the rules are. Somebody had to decide how they were going to solve this problem. I think writing is problem solving. And so I'm not a great believer in inspiration. I just write. I just feel it. I just want it to happen. My characters live in my head and they come out. All that's nonsense for me. May work for other people. It's not me. It's about thinking. It's about structure. It's the characters develop, and so on. So I'm a great believer in making the structure work. And as I said, that there's nothing wrong with my story. You liked it and so on, but it's only in the second book you get the twists. And I would have liked to have put one of the twists in that, but I couldn't because of the way the story was structured. And that's why it's a three-parter. So in a way, if it was all one book, the twists would come in the right place. The twists would come in the middle. But because it's in three parts, because of the age group it's aimed at, it isn't exactly structured the way it's got a revelation but no twist. But that's fine. It's it's still good.
And
we're towards the end of this glorious yet amazing interview. Every interview I do is always amazing. I just have to think of a better word than amazing. But I don't know what I'm sorry.
Well, but I mean that's the other thing. The other thing, I have, and all writers have this. I have a physical thesaurus. You see how old this is. Look how battered it is. But I have a thesaurus. And you get them online now, but the physical ones have got more options for you. So I've got my phone here. So what I tend to do is have it nearby. So if I'm writing, I don't break up the screen. I go straight onto my phone. I put in the word and then put thesaurus, and then that gives me another option for a different word. And I do that more in redrafting. And just get the right word, because you don't want it. When you're reading a book quietly to yourself, you're not just reading it; you are creating the sound in your head. Yeah. And you can almost hear yourself. That's the way the brain works. It doesn't quite realize it does, but you are creating the sound because you know that word has a sound. And I often find I try to avoid internal rhymes within a sentence. So if there's two words that sound alike, I try to find a different word because it just slightly jars as you're reading it. And certainly if you were doing an audiobook of it, you would have an internal rhyme. And internal rhymes, unless they're intentional, can just sound a bit odd. So that's normally draft 6 when you're going into the minutiae of it, and then you realize that you've repeated the same word. I I mentioned the other day that I had repeated that word that I had previously mentioned, and you, what? Why is there two mentioned in this sentence? So you if you need to find, you change it to remarked upon or whatever it is, that you just find a different way of doing it. But that's something that normally comes at the latter stages of it. Just get it down, just get the story out first.
Yeah. And so, coming toward the end of this chorus interview, this is the point of the interview where you can tell people where they can find you, not your home address, but where can people find you online, and where can people buy your books?
Well, I'm on Twitter, which is just Steve Nallon, all one word. I'm on Instagram, it's the same. And there's also Swidger Books, which has Instagram and Pinter and all those things, Tumblr, but I don't really use those. So the best way to find me is probably Twitter. And that's got links to the BFI, well, the link to the film I did about the BFI the time travel season, which is on iPlayer. So I put all the links to various things on the Twitter. That's probably the one I use most often. I have a website. In fact, I've got two websites. I've got Nallon.com, which is pretty much everything I've ever done, going back to when I was on the clubs when I was a teenager, plus Swidgers.com, which is for the Swidgers book series. And that's got a load of stuff about time travel. It's got details about the destination time travel. And it's got loads of background on Swidgers and the history of that, and schools as well. So next week, I'm hopefully going to do some a talk in a school about time travel. So that's sort of what I also do, and I do museum talks and when I'm asked. So and on both websites there is an email contact, which you just press the contact button and send me a message. In terms of the book, this is now predominantly online. It is in a couple of shops, but it sadly never got into Waterstones, which is one of the reasons it didn't sell as perhaps it should have done, because we didn't get into Waterstones. The publisher, it's a tiny publisher. It's a proper publisher, but it's a very small publisher. This one has just come out. Destination Time Travel, it's just been released. It was released last week, and that is in hardback form, as you can see. It's proper book. It's very exciting. And for Doctor Who fans, I don't know if you know this, but for Doctor Who fans, you look very closely. If I allow it to come in, you will see, I hope, if it focuses, maybe it won't, but the price is 1963.
Wow, that's a coincidence.
There's no such thing as coincidence in time travel stories. My idea was, I said to Dick, I said, why don't we have it priced at 1985, for Back to the Future? He said, no, 1963. And I said, perfect. And the publishers went along with it. Though they did say they'd lose 37 pence because they were going to lose, they were going to charge £20 for it. And it's not, and frankly, if you look on any of the online sites, it's not at 1963 because nobody sells a book at retail price anymore. It's always a lot lower. Yeah. So it's certainly available on Amazon a lot less than 1963. Wow. But it's a good little, and also the American cost is, we had a long discussion about this. The American cost, because must be available in America, is dollars, of course, $36.91, which is 1963 backwards.
Well, there we have it. The wonderful world of Steve Nallon has come back full circle. It's like the perfect pairing you always wanted. The beginning of time, and the end of time, and in the middle, more of me withering on to a selection of other people. But like time was always meant to merge, and obviously time travel is well, technically time travel is real because we're moving towards the future rather than moving towards the past. So if you want to get pedantic, if you want to get
or is it all one? Is time all one? That's another philosophical question for you.
Yeah. And if you want to be nerdy about time travel, then watch The Science of Time Travel by Brian Cox on the BBC iPlayer, because
That's very good. Yeah.
one, it's very good, and two, you listen to Brian Cox say something actually more interesting than look, there's a star in the sky, which can get a little bit tiresome when you've heard him say it 4 times already.
But they all look alike, don't they?
But you don't know what the difference is. So there you have it. So where will you see this face more? Well, as you probably already know, this is channel number 3 out of 20. So I'm everywhere, I'm nowhere, and I'm everywhere all at once. No reference to any Oscar-worthy winning film. But I will be everywhere. There'll be more interviews from me. You can find them on the other channels. Now, YouTube has stupidly removed the channels page when you click on the channels, see which other channels I run. So I best bet, if you want to find out where all my other channels is, and I think I've updated it, I will kick myself if I haven't, but go to tommason.uk and click on YouTube channels on that. It's a website I've made, my website, and you can find my videos, you can find all sorts of nonsense I've done in a broader fashion, because I am the king of nonsense. I will attack anyone that says otherwise. So thank you, Steve Nallon, for returning for another glorious interview.
And I'll come back last year, since it's time travel. I'll come back last year.
And remember, no, I've forgotten.